Welcome back to the New Bridge Radio Show on WLTKDB Let's Talk. I am your host, Kevin Mackey, and we are connecting you to what's next in your life. And we're here to remind you that you are important to this world, and we sure are glad to have you along on this episode of the New Bridge Radio Show. Remember, you can catch us live on our station website. Just head on over to www.wltkdb.com. You can join the video feed, and you can also join the chat room and meet like-minded people there. Also, if you would like to get in touch with the New Bridge Radio Show, you can email us. Our email address is thenewbridgeradioshow@gmail.com. Feel free to drop us a line and let us know what you like about our show. And if you must, let us know what you don't like about the show. Also, let us know if you would like to be our guest on the show. We love listening and hearing from people who have connected to what was next in their life. I am super excited about tonight's show. Our guest is an author. He holds a PhD in chemistry, along with 15 patents. He is a very successful YouTuber. He is the chemist and herbal formulator of Medicine Man Plant Company and all of their supplements. And most importantly, he is a nationally recognized foraging instructor, and he enjoys teaching about edible plants and medicinal plants. And he is Dr. Mark Merriweather Vonderbruggen, and we're super excited to have him on the New Bridge Radio Show. Welcome to the show, Mark. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, and I want to thank you for pronouncing my name right. That's always a sign of a professional. That sets me at ease.
Thanks, Mark. You know what? I had to practice it a lot.
Yeah, but you didn't ask me how to say it, so it's like, okay, let's see what happens.
Yeah, well, the name that you took the name Merriweather is interesting. I thought it was an interesting story why you took that. Tell us that story real quick.
So, yeah, I've always been in love with plants, and when I'd be out with my hiking buddies, I would be slowing them down because I was recording the plants I was seeing and trying to identify the plants, and it was driving them nuts. And so they said, come on, Merriweather, we still got 10 miles to go today. And it's like, hey, it just became my trail name. Mm-hmm. And then as my work in the plant world grew, I had the choice of Vonderbruggen or Merriweather. I did put an excessive number of R's in Merriweather as just kind of a kindness to my dad. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
So I've become familiar with your story, and I know that you plants started interesting you at a young age, mostly because of your parents.
Correct. Both my parents were children of the Great Depression, and one of the ways different small communities up in Minnesota where I was raised got through that terrible time was through their knowledge of wild edible plants and medicinal plants. And our folks would take us out in the woods every day, mainly to wear us out so that they could get some rest from us. But during that, they would be picking the plants and the nuts and stuff and telling us about how their grandparents used them. My mom hates the fact that I teach these classes because she's horribly embarrassed by it, because it's like, oh, they'll know we were poor. Oh, stop. And it's like, wow. Mom, it's okay. They like this. There's no stigmata, associated with it now. Mm-hmm.
So she feels better about it now, right?
Not really, no.
That's interesting. Yeah. So I'm imagining that we were kind of having a conversation before this with my producer. I'm imagining when you start your class, I'm imagining a lot of students probably say right out of the gate, tell us everything that's poison.
Funny story about that, actually. So I teach at a lot of places. One of them was the Houston Arboretum. And one October, they said, well, how about you do a poisonous plant class? And we thought, that'd be cool. And they got it all set up. And then their lawyer said, no way in hell are you going to teach that class? And he pointed out that the number one way a wife kills her husband is with poison. And it was only women signed up for the class.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but it's funny because after classes, I've had people contact me like several months later. Like a wife will say, "Hey, I just want to thank you. My husband treats me so much nicer now after we took your class together." And it's like, okay, I kind of suspect I know why because he knows you now know how to kill him.
Mhm.
But so far, I don't think I've been involved in any murders. I hope to keep it that way.
Exactly, exactly. Those are all the plants that everybody is curious about.
Yeah.
We have something here in Washington that's called a creeping buttercup, and it has little stinging nettles on it. I think a lot of people call them nettles, and I have this crazy neighbor who eats them.
Okay, I'm gonna stop you right here because you are confusing two plants.
Oh,
So
I probably
there
am.
is a poisonous plant called creeping buttercup,
Hmm.
and there is a very good wild edible covered with stinging hairs called stinging nettle.
Oh, okay.
And so stinging nettle is very, very nutritious, very high in minerals. You just got to steam it or kind of not even so much boil it, but just heat it up, flash heat it in some steam, which renders the needles limp and kind of removes the irritation. The creeping buttercup, the poison in it is really fascinating
Mm.
because what it does is it turns you into a redhead.
A
Let me
red.
explain. So there are compounds in the Ranunculus repens, the creeping buttercup, that makes people or makes mammals hyper photosensitive, which means if they eat the plant and then go out in the sunlight, they immediately burst out in second degree sunburn. So
Oh,
I have a redheaded brother, and that's basically what happens whenever he gets exposed to the sun. And so that's the joke. It turns you into a redhead, but it makes you super hyper photosensitive to this point where your skin blisters if you're exposed to the sun. This is deadly for livestock if
yeah,
they get
right.
into it.
Oh, well, you know what? I'm glad I brought it up, Dr. Mark, because I owe my neighbor a bit of an apology.
Yeah. If the neighbor's eating it and not looking like a vampire out in the sun, they're eating good stinging nettle.
Right, but she is a redhead.
So even more reason she's probably not eating creeping buttercup.
Well, I wanted to ask you another thing. Um, so you say that not only are there plants that are good as far as eating them, edible plants. Um, as a chemist, I have a specific question about something that happened to me about maybe 2 years ago. We all got laid off, and at the time I didn't have anything to do. So all I did was make breakfast for my dogs, and then I would walk in the forest the rest of the day because we have a huge forest area. And it's pretty being laid off and all that is pretty depressing. But something interesting happened as I was doing this, daily. I started finding after a few weeks that all of that depression and all of that anxiety started to lift. So it felt like the more and there's like tons of um, red cedar trees, and there's tons of maple trees here, and there's tons of things that I suspect are releasing chemicals that might have contributed to that. So I wanted to ask you about that. Do forests do like aerosols?
Yes. Oh, there's another great topic. So let's talk about how does a plant scream in pain, and then we'll go more into the good side.
Okay,
So
okay.
when most plants are under attack by some insect, eating it, the plant can sense this, and it starts releasing a chemical called methyl which
Mhm.
we know as oil of wintergreen.
Oh,
So it releases this pheromone, the wintergreen, into the air around it. The other plants can sense this.
mhm.
Even plants that aren't of the same species, like all plants have also developed this ability that when oil of wintergreen is released around them, it triggers them to bump up their own defensive systems, like increasing the bitter content in their leaves or some sort of maybe pesticide or things like that as a defensive mechanism. So we already know they're releasing that as a way of communicating with one another. The question is, what else are they releasing to communicate? And they found lots and lots. They're constantly exuding these different molecules that we really have no idea what they do and what they're saying to each other with these chemicals. But they're doing it for some reason. Plants are, well, I like to use the term lazy because then I can say I'm not being lazy. I'm being like a plant. But they're very efficient. They don't do anything they don't have to do. They don't do anything that doesn't improve their own life. And so making these molecules just to release them into the air, that doesn't make sense. So they're doing something with it. So they've shown many studies that being out in nature, walking around in nature, has all sorts of great mental effects. A big thing is with attention deficit disorder type issues. They've shown as you're walking around outside in the wild, ideally off the path, not on some concrete walkway through the park, but actually, following a deer trail or something like that. If you can do that 3 times a week for about 40 minutes, a lot of the symptoms of attention deficit disorders just go away, especially in children. And part of the theory is when you are out in the wild, you are where you evolved, and you are giving your brain what it evolved to constantly be getting in. So let's talk about that. When you're in the wild, all your senses are being activated, not just your eyes, not just your ears, your sense of smell. You're picking up, whatever. Your body is constantly searching for resources it can use or threats that are trying to kill you. And so your smell is involved with that. Right. They've shown that the hunter-gatherers that are still around have amazing senses of smells, and the people that spend a lot of time with them develop that too. It's just not, usually in modern life, our goal with the sense of smell is to not smell anything except maybe food.
Covered up.
Yeah. But we got that going on. So we got all that sensory input coming from our nose, our eyes, our ears. Our skin, the hair is picking up the direction the wind is blowing. We're usually picking up sticks or something and throwing it at stuff. It's just an innate thing that we do. But all this stuff, the sensory input and motion and activity with our hands is feeding our brain all the information it evolved to want and need that it's not getting there if you're just sitting at a desk staring at a computer screen. And so the brain is going, finally, you know what I need. And it just lifts everything.
That makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense because it was not. So I also joined this little group of people that did elf walks, and and there was a friend of mine that did it. She take these group of common corporate people, and Dr. Mark had always started the same. Everybody was a little inhibited and a little shy at the beginning. But then as they started walking through the forest, all of a sudden they'd start talking and maybe they'd trip or something would happen. And all of a sudden, by the end of the trip, everybody's, stress-free and laughing.
A tribe has been formed.
Yeah.
That's another big side of it. The social side. We are tribal creatures. We need social interaction. And that was one of the worst parts about the whole COVID thing is that you cannot see, touch, be around everyone. Everyone has to be in a different room. In prison, they call that solitary confinement. It's the worst thing you can do to someone. But by bringing them together, especially in the woods, you're a tribe.
Exactly. So let me ask you this question. I have so as you were learning about edible plants, was there something that you found along the way that became like your favorite, your go-to plant?
Ooh. Oh, that's a hard one because there's so many. One plant in particular down here is the Yaupon holly, Iliox vomitoria, or the holly of vomiting. Let me explain. So it does not actually cause vomiting. The first Western encounters of it were some botanists finding some of the Native Americans down here using it before a religious ceremony. They were drinking lots and lots of tea made from the leaves of the Yaupon holly, dancing around for 3 days straight, staying awake, forcing themselves to vomit, purging themselves before the actual religious ceremony. And so the botanist said, well, what are we going to call it? And like, if you ever want to see just how sick and twisted most scientists are, look at the names of beetles, the scientific names of beetles. But the same thing goes on with plants. And it's like, hey, let's call it the holly of vomiting. Oh, yeah, that'd be funny. Okay, it's the holly of vomiting, Iliox vomitoria. Well, why I like Yaupon holly and why the Native Americans like it so much is it is the only plant in North America, the only native North American plant that produces caffeine in usable amounts.
Oh.
So if you have dried leaves of the Yaupon holly, pound for pound, it has about half the caffeine of regular Sensinea tea, but it does not have any of the tannins. If you let your Lipton's tea soak in water too long, it gets bitter. That's due to tannic acid. The Yaupon holly does not have those tannins, so you can let the leaves soak in the cup all day long. Just keep adding hot water to it. You extract all the caffeine with the first blast of hot water, and then all the other beneficial antioxidants and other medicinal compounds throughout the rest of the day. And it tastes great. It never turns bitter. It almost has a natural sort of sweetness to it. I would put, if you're familiar with yerba mate, it's better than that. So yerba mate would be a South American holly that has caffeine in it. But the Yaupon, yeah, it was actually sold from the land or the territories that were known now as Texas up into the New England colonies before the War of Independence. And it actually became so popular that it interfered with the English tea sales. And so the English hired people to say, hey, that tea you're getting from down south, from Louisiana and Texas, it's Iliox vomitoria, the holly of vomiting. It's going to make you sick. And overnight, sales plummeted. And then the English tea, became the only thing you could buy. In the long run, it did not work out so well for England, though. So,
Right. Now,
unintended consequences. But
now, does it look like a holly? Like
it's a small leaf holly. So the individual leaves are maybe the size of my fingertip, but it has little red berries. They're very stiff leaves. It's not as prickly as the American holly, the Christmas holly. I will say the Christmas holly, it does not have caffeine in it. It does have some wintergreen. So the tea made from the Christmas holly is it actually does have some tannins and some other bitter compounds. Well, not tannins, but it does have some other bitter compounds. So it has a wintergreen bitter flavor, kind of like Christmas when you're poor. My mom hates that joke. Because it's true.
Christmas when you're poor.
But the Yaupon holly tastes great, and it has caffeine.
So, do you yourself partake of that instead of regular coffee or tea?
I do both, because there's also health benefits and good molecules in coffee that aren't found in the Yaupon holly. So I do. Yeah, I'm not a vegan. We'll get that out of the way right from the get-go. But I understand the power and the glory of plants and mushrooms. And so
Right.
my house basically looks like a witch's shop with all these clusters of plants hanging everywhere.
And people question you, why do you have this?
Not anymore, no.
Not anymore. They expect it now.
Yeah.
Now, is there a plant that you? So I'll tell you. Somebody said this, and I don't know if it's a rumor, but a friend of mine said that dandelions actually have so many purposes, medicinal purposes. It's not even funny. She said we don't even understand all of the medicinal purposes of dandelions. Is that true?
Oh, yes. Dandelions are awesome. So another story time. In the flowers of the dandelions, besides making a wonderful tea and jelly and wine, there are compounds that help speed up the healing of damaged skin.
Oh.
So I have two daughters, and they were in ballet. And if you've ever seen a ballerina's foot, they get tore up. And so being the loving herbalist father that I was making a medicated ointment from dandelion flowers for them to rub on their feet after the class each day. And then my wife found out what was going on and read me the riot act. Because apparently I was slowing their development of calluses that they would need for when they go up on point shoes.
Oh.
So, oopsie.
Yeah.
I just saw my kids' feet hurt. I know how to fix it. Oh,
Right.
There we go.
Yeah. The friend gave me a recipe for dandelion syrup. So,
Ooh.
and it was during the winter, and I was like very excited. I was like, you know what? I am definitely going to make this syrup from the dandelions, and it took like 60 dandelion flowers in order to make the tea. And you know what, Mark? I was looking forward to it. Over the summer, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna, dandelions. I can grow those asleep. But you know, that the whole summer, not one, not one dandelion.
They smelled the wintergreen and ran.
Yeah, they were like, we're not becoming syrup. Anyway, well,
that's just one. The flowers are just one of the power too. We can talk more if you.
Yeah, well, we definitely will. So my producer is saying we've got to go to a station break. So we are going to step away for a moment, and we are going to hear from our sponsor, and we will be right back on the New Bridge Radio Show.
Looking to launch your new masterpiece? Then try something new with Moonbow Publishing and Publications. At Moonbow, we have a strong desire to serve authors in a powerful and meaningful way. After all, you've poured your heart and soul into your writing, and we fully understand and respect that. Remember this: you will own the copyright to your work. You will have the final say on your work before published. Even after all of that, we've saved the best for last. We won't take a percentage sold. Nope, not a penny. Excited about MoonbowPublications.com yet? We thought so. Take advantage of our company's services like book editing, formatting, and covers, publishing, and photography. Moonbow Publishing and Publications has everything you're looking for in a company. Remember, we will not keep any commissions. We are a boutique publishing company focusing on spiritual, health and wellness, and personal growth genres. So come and see what we can do for you at MoonbowPublications.com. That's MoonbowPublications.com. Moonbow Publications, a new kind of publishing company.
Welcome back to the New Bridge Radio Show on WLTKDB Let's Talk. I'm Kevin Mackey, and tonight we are talking to Dr. Mark Merriweather. And Dr. Mark, we were just talking about dandelions. And we were talking about dandelion syrup. And I think the way to keep them away is just to want them to grow.
Surprising how things in life work out that way. But most definitely.
So what are some of the other uses that these weeds have?
All right, so let's continue with dandelion here for a bit. So I'm going to quiz you on something here.
Sure.
How deep into the ground does a dandelion root grow?
Well, pretty deep. I believe it's like 14 inches.
Try 12 feet.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know it was that much.
Yeah. So dandelions love areas that are, from a plant point of view, dead. So if you have soil and you tear it up to do something, and then every time it rains, if there's no plant material there, like roots to hold the water in place, it leaches the minerals deeper and deeper and deeper into the soil. So as you leach these minerals deeper and deeper into the soil, they're not available for other plants to live, and so the soil basically becomes barren and worthless. The dandelions come in and say, hey, I got this. It sends a root. It can live in that. It sends a root down 12, 14 feet into the ground, starts taking all those minerals that got leached deep in the soil, brings them back up to the surface. That's one of the things that makes the leaves so nutritious and so loaded with minerals, is because it's now sucking the minerals up from, a huge, part of the soil, bringing them all back up. The plan then is eventually the dandelion dies, the leaves get deposited on the surface of the soil, where they slowly decompose, release the minerals into it. Also a compound called humic acid, which helps kind of keep the minerals trapped there. And the root decomposes, filling a 12-foot column of soil with organic matter. But along with the minerals, the leaves and the roots also have some other medicinal uses. One of the main ones is herbalists will refer to it as a blood cleanser. A blood cleanser, a way of cleaning the blood of toxins, which is a much nicer way of saying it makes you go to the bathroom a lot. It makes you pee. In fact, the French slang name for dandelion is the pee in the bed plant because it is a powerful diuretic. But by urinating, you are getting rid of toxins. And so as you're drinking a lot of water, and it's shown to stimulate the lymph system and the blood, get it flowing a little better, reducing blood pressure some so you can get the blood flowing through areas, reduces inflammation. One of the problems with infected areas is the body's immune response causes that area to kind of swell up. And by swelling up, it kind of seals the capillaries and stuff around there to keep the infection localized so it can't get into the body. But then you also have a problem getting nutrients and stuff in there. And so the dandelions kind of tell the body, okay, let's work together on this, shall we? Release some of the inflammation so I can get some of these things in here to help kill the bad stuff. Mm-hmm. And so it works out really well.
Well, it must be terrible then that people are spraying Roundup on them because it must be going deep down into the soil then.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that's one of the problems is people don't appreciate dandelions. They don't appreciate how nutritious they are, how good they are for the soil. One of the things I like to point out, if you ever go to the wine country in France, at the right time of year, you will see under all the vines, it's loaded with dandelions. Because it's doing the same thing. It's bringing the minerals up from deep down in the soil back to the surface. And when they die, they deposit the fertilizer there. They've shown, well, you might have heard how certain wine aficionados can tell where from France a particular wine is just by the taste without seeing the label.
Yep.
Scientists, being scientists, have figured out what these people are actually tasting is the unique combination of minerals that was in the grapes from the soil. So that terroir, the taste of the soil, is the taste of the minerals of the soil. That taste of the minerals of the soil is due to the dandelions bringing them up where the grapevines can get them.
Well,
and so really what they're tasting is dandelion. But then they get upset when you point that out to them. And no.
Right.
So.
I know one Salmonet, but that was Salmonier. That would probably hate to know that. So are there other plants that are just as valuable for their medicinal reasons?
Oh, wow. You're talking to an herbalist here, right?
Yes, I do. That's why I'm asking.
Okay, we got, 30 minutes to cover 500 plants?
We can do it.
Okay, so another one I'm absolutely in love with, found all across North America, is elderberry. So elderberry, the flowers and the berries are both loaded with medicinal compounds that in particular focus on speeding up and increasing the size of the white blood cells that are part of your active immune system. So what this means, so when you think of, like the jab, the COVID jab, is to trigger antibodies. Antibodies are just a fancy way of saying the killer cells in your body that target a specific thing. So in your body, you have the innate immune system and the active immune system. The innate is just these things, Pac-Man floating around looking for things that don't belong, glom onto it, and then they both die together. And it kind of kills itself and takes the other thing with it. If Pac-Man can't handle it, if there's too many of these invaders, then it sends a signal out to the active immune system that says, okay, here's what you're looking for. This thing here, make a whole bunch of white blood cells that know how to target this thing and release them. And usually that can take several days. But with the elderberry, it's shown to speed it up even almost to hours.
Oh,
That
wow.
it speeds up the release of the white blood cells that are specific for that enemy and increases the number of them being released too. And generally, this is a good thing. Unless you have an autoimmune disease like lupus, where your immune system has decided some part of you is bad, and so there can be some problems there where it may trigger that. But the elderberry itself, it has a long and ancient history of being used medicinally to fight bacterial and viral infections. And what it's doing, it's not so much fighting the infection, it is making your immune system better at fighting the infection. So that's really good.
So is elderberry throughout the entire United States?
All the way from Florida and Texas all the way up to Alaska, pretty much. Yeah.
So are they also using elderberry? I know you're the formulator for the nutritional
Yeah.
supplements.
Medicine
Are
Man
you?
Plant Co.
Are they using that in there as well?
Yes, in the immune pill, which doesn't show up on the green screen. But the immune pill is a mixture of elderberry, echinacea, cordyceps mushroom, a mint called Self-Heal, Prunella vulgaris, and a little bit of vitamin C. And they all work together on both the active and the innate immune system to make you more resistant to things. I always have to be very careful how I word things because the FDA is watching.
Right.
So,
They are very particular, especially
especially
in
right
this
now.
day and age. Right, especially on YouTube.
Yeah.
So I have questions about edible plants. Now, as you were growing up and your parents were pointing these out, did they point any out that you thought were absolutely horrible and not even edible?
No, actually, they did not, because for one thing, the plants they were pointing out were the ones that they had used regularly as food.
Mhm.
It wasn't like canned mackerel patties. This was good stuff.
Right. You've
But
had
as I delved more into it and started finding edible plants that they either weren't aware of or didn't use, then I started realizing, yeah, some of these, they're kind of bitter or tart or things like that. They're not wonderful, just, ooh, I'm glad I ate that sort of foods at the time. Now, depending on how hungry you are, that can change things. And also, there are a lot of cooking techniques for dealing with that, especially something bitter. That's one of the issues a lot of people have with dandelion, the greens, is they're somewhat bitter. But by mixing it with something sour, you trick the brain. The brain cannot taste sour and bitter at the same time. It focuses on sour, with the bitter just becomes hints of something. And so it completely changes the flavor profile. As a chef, you would probably experimented with this some.
Absolutely. So another thing that I wanted to ask you is, on as you're teaching this to students, is there and they're going through and foraging and tasting some of these plants, are there plants that they're actually surprised by,
Yes.
pleasantly surprised by?
Yes. Okay. One of the favorites, and it's found all across North America, is a plant called wood sorrel. And there's a whole bunch in this genus, Oxalis species. And it has a wonderful lemony sort of flavor. If you know what a shamrock looks like, so the three heart-shaped leaves that everyone says, hey, it's a clover. No, it's not a clover. Clover have round leaves. Oxalis have heart. If you see heart-shaped leaves, that's oxalis. I get a little upset by that. But like the shamrocks are actually Oxalis species, and they are wonderful. And they're good on their own. They're good anywhere you would use lemon, sprinkled on chicken, on fish, on lamb, after you cook, because if you cook with it, it pretty much disappears. But one of the best ways to use it is in a cream soup, like a cream of mushroom or cream of potato. You add this is probably going to offend you, but you get your can of Campbell's cream of mushroom soup, mix it up according to the recipe, but throw a quarter cup of the wood sorrel into it. And the whole flavor profile changes. Again, it's really good. You got this kind of tangy, lemony thing going really well with the cream. Very, very good. And then you make a green bean casserole with it, and it's even better. And you replace the green beans with prickly pear cactus, and now, wow, you're doing great.
Prickly
Just
pear
saying.
cactus. The prickly pear cactus is very good for you, though. Yes.
Oh, okay, yes, yes. So the prickly pear cactus, it has a long history of being eaten in North America. Let's talk a little bit about medicinal chemists, because at the beginning I have a master's in medicinal chemistry, a
Right.
PhD in physical organic chemistry. I was planning on going into pharmaceutical chemistry, but I got distracted. Love will do that to a man. But anyway, so when one of the ways medicinal chemists try and find new medicine is they will study the food of a particular group of people where everyone eats the same foods and see if there's any health issues that seem to be avoided by those people or is common, and then they kind of work around from that. So some medicinal chemists were studying the diets of people in the Southwest because people in the Southwest have a very, very low incidence of different types of tumorous cancers. So like breast cancer, cervical cancer, liver cancer, kidney cancer, those are things very low. High skin cancer, but low on all the others. And through years of study, they tracked it down to the eating of the prickly pear cactus, the pads.
Oh wow.
Because it wasn't just the people who were like native to the area. It was people who moved in and had been living there at least 10 years also. So it wasn't a genetic predisposition for the prickly pear cactus. There was something in it that prevented the cancers from forming. Again, going to get in trouble with FDA here, but so be it. What was really neat, the studies, when they were doing it, so there are certain cancers that, after you remove the tumor, there's a good chance that it will grow back. And so they put you on different cancer preventative chemotherapy drugs. So they took a group of people that had these sort of cancers, split them in half, and then half got the prickly pear cactus in capsule form, and the other half got a capsule, just a placebo capsule. And the test was supposed to go about 3 years, but after 18 months, the scientists said, we got to stop this. It's immoral to keep going, because none of the people taking the prickly pear cactus had gotten any return of any cancer. But on the placebo side, like half of them were already starting to show the signs of the tumors regrowing. And so, long story short, try and have prickly pear cactus pads in your diet like 3 times a week, like a cup of them.
Yeah.
You can buy, the canned, jarred prickly pear cactus from, whatever grocery stores up down here. It's like H-E-B and Kroger. I'm giving free advertising. I probably shouldn't do that, but you can bleep it out. But you can buy it in the stores. Mm-hmm. But there's a totally different effect also from the prickly pear cactus and slimy foods in general. So like down here, okra is another big one.
Right.
But things with slime, because this slime, it's mucilage, the particular molecule that's responsible for that slime really likes to grab onto sugar and hold it very tightly and only slowly release it as it's passing through the digestive tract. So slimy foods like okra, prickly pear cactus, in the wild violets, aloe vera juice, things like that, it binds to the sugar and reduces the sugar concentration in your blood because it only slowly releases it rather than causes it to spike. So it's really great for like type 2 diabetics and people who are trying to do a slow release of the sugar rather than get the high release.
You know what? They have speaking of that, they have a drink here that they sell in a lot of the markets in Seattle, and it's always in the Asian section, and it comes in a huge bottle, and it's an aloe vera drink.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of flavored, and I bought it once, and it's really chunky.
Those are good chunks. It's supposed to be that way.
It was very chunky, and I was like, But when as you're going through the grocery store, and you look at other people's carts, some people just have a ton of it in their cart, and I didn't know that it had that kind of benefit, though. So,
yeah.
That's interesting.
Now, if you're loading the drink up with sugar, you've kind of defeated it.
Right.
But yeah, include it with with your dessert or something like that, with your meals.
Nice.
And bind up the sugar.
Well, let me ask you about another topic. So we have a very nice reserve in our town, and it's big, and I'm usually there every weekend walking through there, and because it's got these really old maple trees in there, just really old maple trees, and uh, I, I know that there is, in the spring when you're walking through there, you can smell maple syrup in there. Um, and I was curious to know about the tree itself. Is it just the syrup that is edible, or is there more to that tree that's edible?
Oh, there's more. There's more.
Hmm.
So this time of year, well, if I say this time of year, because of pumpkin seeds. So you know the maple
Hmm.
seeds, they have the little helicopter type thing.
Right.
When they're still green, almost mature, but not complete mature, but not when they're brown and dropping, but just before they get that stage, you can peel them out of the shell and roast them the same way as pumpkin seeds. And they're really good.
Oh, nice.
Now, once they dry and start dropping, they
Hmm.
increase the bitter compounds in their in the nut meat to prevent them from being eaten by animals, so the animals
Hmm.
don't like it. But when you get them when they're big and green and just about ready to turn brown, that's when you go with it. So that's one thing.
Hmm.
Another is going back to the spring, the young leaves. In Japan, they take the young maple leaves and they deep fry them in like a
Oh.
tempura batter.
Uh-huh.
Very good, very good. And in the Norway and Scandinavia, they make a sauerkraut from the leaves. So they do a lacto fermentation of the young maple leaves, and that's also
Oh.
really good.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So if you make your own sauerkraut or cream cheese, you can grab the maple leaves when they're like,
Hmm.
about the size of a quarter to the size of a 50-cent piece, and throw those in there too.
Oh,
And they're
nice.
really neat. And then the
S-
last thing is the inner bark, the
mhm,
cambium layer. So
mhm,
not the outer bark, not the dead wood inside, but the xylem and phloem, the living area that the sap flows in.
mhm.
On trees like the maple, the elm, you might have heard of slippery elm bark being
Yep.
edible and medicinal. Yeah, and then the pine trees, and also beech. That inner bark is edible and can have anywhere from 200 to up to 600 calories per pound.
Mhm.
And so it was a staple food. It was actually kind of interesting. After World War II, Europe was destroyed,
Right.
and the U.S. was sending, and Canada, I've got to get Canada, U.S. and Canada were sending tons of loaves of bread to Europe to feed the people. But even our Great Plains could not make enough bread to feed them until someone realized, you know what? If we take the sawdust from the elm and the beech and the maple and the pine, mix it in with the bread because it is edible and it is a source of calories, then we can ship them enough calories. And that's what they did. And
Oh,
so
interesting.
because there was a lot of lumber being shipped over there too.
Hmm.
And so when you get a log, you cut down a tree, the first thing the sawmill does is square it up,
Right.
and then it has the leftover wood. So they take that leftover wood where the cambium layer was in, grind that into the sawdust to put in the loaves of bread to get enough calories to the people.
Interesting. Y- y- You, you know what? So we're in the area where we have all the Lashutseed tribes here. The Snohomish and the
Hmm.
Skykomish, and they, used to eat a flower that grows here. I think it's called a humus flower. But are there, do you find that there are edible flowers that people can eat that are healthy and taste good?
Oh yeah. So one of my favorites, it's more of a Gulf Coast sort of one. It's called Turks Cap.
Uh-huh.
It is a native hibiscus. It is a member of the mallow family.
Hmm.
So it looks like a small hibiscus flower.
Hmm.
Very tasty. What's really interesting about it, it's so this is in a really hot, humid area.
Right.
So in the morning, well, over the night, there's no sugar, no nectar in the flowers. And then when the first rays of sunlight hit it, it starts increasing the sugar content. The sugar content increases until about mid morning, but then it drops off during the heat of the day and stays low because nothing wants to be flying around in the heat of the day.
Right.
and then in the afternoon it starts climbing again. So I tell people what you got to do if you're going to harvest the flowers at their most sweet point is watch the hummingbirds and the bees. And when they're swarming them, you put on your hummingbird-proof suit, you go out, and hummingbirds are mean. I don't know if you've ever had a hummingbird feeder, but they will dive down on you. They're tasty, but they're mean.
They're tasty, right?
Don't eat the hummingbirds. They're bony. Right. But you watch when they are, and that's when you go out and pick the flowers, and they're really, really good. Wild sunflowers, the petals taste kind of like a sunflower seed. So they're really tasty. Not the disc flowers inside, but the ray flowers that stick out around the edge. We already talked about the dandelion flowers. You can eat those.
So another thing I want to ask you about is in the reserve, there's this huge tree. It's gorgeous, especially in the fall. It turns all golden. And at first it was dropping something on the ground, and I was like, "What the heck is this thing that it is?"
Ooh. Can I guess what the tree?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it a ginkgo?
I don't.
Oh,
I think
okay.
it is called a black walnut tree.
Oh, okay. All right. So yeah, black walnut, very good. I was guessing a ginkgo because ginkgo trees get huge and they are beautiful golden color and they drop a fruit. Unfortunately, the fruit smells like dog poo, but the seed inside the fruit, once you've cleaned it completely off and roasted it, is very good. But okay, black walnuts, that's another one that's all over down here too. And so it forms a big walnuts. And I will warn you, so there's this green husk that turns black pretty quickly around the actual hard nut. That green husk is going to stain your fingers brown, kind of like a henna, the tattoo type stuff, or the temporary tattoo type stuff. Yeah, so wear gloves. Once you get the husks off and you get to that hard nut, it's again a hard nut to crack. So usually a hammer and an anvil. What my dad would do would just lay them on the driveway and just drive back and forth of them with the car. And every so often one would go shooting out from under the tire. But it takes some work to crack them open. But they have a very, very rich flavor, much stronger walnut flavor than the English walnuts. It's like the English walnut on steroids. And raw, they're almost a little too intense, but once baked into goods, very, very good.
Amazing. So when I took some of those pods home with me. Now, to plant those, would you have to take the husk off of them and plant just the nut part?
Yeah. I was just going to flip to black walnut in the book here. As it is in the... Oh.
Yes, indeed. There it is.
Unfortunately, again, with the green screen. Okay, my plan did not work. But yeah, it's in the book. And what's really interesting, so you can plant them still with the husk on. That husk will actually decompose pretty readily. The other thing you can do is just throw them in a bucket of water, the green husk and everything, and let them sit there for about a week. And that outer husk will just kind of ferment off. And then you just take the whole thing and dump it in different areas. And you can dig up the soil a little. Basically pretend you're a squirrel hiding a nut. Because squirrels love these things.
Right.
Back in Minnesota, the house next to my folks, they have two huge black walnut trees. And during the during the nut season, which is also the squirrel season, the squirrels are taking the nuts and hiding them everywhere, like inside the engine compartment of the cars there. So they'll in the morning they have to open the hood first to make sure there's no squirrel in there, and then to take the nuts out, because otherwise they rattle around and can get into the fan belt and stuff like that, and it's bad. But yeah, you can just take them and plant them. Now, the thing you need to know about black walnuts is in the leaves and in the bark and even in the husks of the black walnut, it produces a natural herbicide.
Oh.
They don't like any other plants around them except for a few grasses and a few other things. And so, like, if you have beautiful landscaping or a garden and you plant a black walnut on one side of it, it's going to kill everything around it. That's why you don't even put the black walnut leaves in your compost pile, because that herbicide is persistent. It's natural, but it ain't good for other plants.
Oh, nice. That would be that's a good point because maybe somebody didn't know that.
Yeah.
And well, this the black walnut tree that's in the reserve, it's got to be pretty old, and it's growing next to a western red cedar, and the western red cedar is huge. I mean, huge, huge. So I'm guessing that they must be able to get along
They
somehow.
probably do, yeah. There's not many, but occasionally they'll work out a symbiotic relationship.
Absolutely. So, I want to ask you about what we in the minutes we have left. I'm curious to ask about the yew tree, the yew
Okay.
tree. Some people have told me that that tree is deadly poison and don't touch it, and some people say that it has medicinal purposes as well.
Okay, so the native yew tree is actually kind of interesting. So most of the parts of the plant are actually very, very poisonous, except for the berries. The berries are edible, but from a medicinal point of view, way back, man, it had to be in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, Taxol, a anti-cancer medication or anti-cancer compound, was found inside the yew tree. Basically, the way most chemotherapy drugs work
Hmm.
is they're poisons,
Right.
but they poison the cancer cells before they poison the healthy cells, if you're lucky.
Hmm.
And there's usually one of the things about a lot of cancer cells is their metabolic rate is higher than the normal healthy cells. That's because they're constantly reproducing and making more cancer cells. And so you can take cells or take compounds that basically either interfere with the metabolic rate or part of the metabolic process takes molecule A and breaks it into molecules B and C. And like B or C is actually very, very poisonous to the cell. I call that a suicide substrate,
Hmm.
where you basically get one molecule into the body, and then somewhere in the body it breaks into the medicinal, or in this case, the killer molecule.
Hmm.
And I don't remember exactly if the Taxol, if it was a suicide substrate, but I want to say it was. But it did, especially in early tests, it did kill the cancer cells more quickly than the healthy cells. But I think there is at least one cancer medication that's still made from it. Generally now they just make it synthetically. It's easier a lot of times, depending on the molecule nowadays, to make it, from bits and pieces in a chemical plant than taking the tree, extracting it from the tree, disposing of the tree, keeping the stuff you want. It's just easier and cheaper to make it from scratch. We're very good at making molecules nowadays. So, but the
Right.
initial study was from these compounds in the plants.
Well, boy, this hour has flown by, Dr. Mark Merriweather. I, we probably could sit here and ask questions about plants for another few hours.
That's happened before, yes. You can always
But
have me back on. I mean,
yeah, definitely, definitely, we will definitely have to have you back on. But in the time remaining, tell people about your Foraging Texas website.
okay. So I've kind of switched it over now to the Medicine Man Plant Co.
Hmm.
But the Foraging Texas, it has 225 plants that are here in Texas, as well as a lot of other places. Plants don't follow geopolitical boundaries, they follow ecosystems and environments. And so, one of the things on the Foraging Texas website is each of those 225 plants, along with how to use it and multiple pictures on how to identify it. It has maps of both Texas at a county level and North America and Canada at a state and province level. So you can see, is this plant also there? And most of them are. One of the things that really messes with my mind, I mentioned I grew up in Minnesota, and so I have a plant calendar in my head based for Minnesota. A lot of the wintertime weeds down here in Texas are summertime plants up in Minnesota.
Oh,
And so the wintertime here feels like summer in Minnesota, and the plants indicate Minnesota summer, but it's Texas winter, and it just screws me up. But then on the medicinal side of things, it's the Medicine Man Plant Co. and the Ancient Plants for Modern Issues sort of thing. And that's where I've finally gone beyond just individually treating people and coming out with a line of supplements of different things to help different lifestyle issues. When I point out to people, we are prehistoric bodies living in a modern world, and it's not working. We spent so much time evolving in a much different world than what we're living in. A lot of things like the obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes is because those parts of us that caused that were crucial to survive, 83,000 generations ago. But we've also been using plants and mushrooms since way back then to treat issues, health issues. And if you think about evolution, survival of the fittest, that's those that responded best to the medicinal plants and mushrooms, very likely the ones passing their genes on and down the line. So we evolved to respond favorably to the plants and mushrooms, medicinal plants and mushrooms that nature provides us.
Right. Mushrooms in themselves are an interesting plant as well.
Technically not a plant, just the scientist.
Right.
Yeah. There's plants, animal, and fungi. They're they're closer to animal.
And fungi do amazing things. We'll have to have you back again, Dr. Mark, and talk about fungi.
Oh, heck yeah.
Because they're using mushrooms here in Washington to purify water.
Yep. And detoxify soil and heal the brain and so many more things.
It's interesting. People will not. When I heard about it, I'm like, I will never think about mushrooms in a bad way ever again.
Well, there's some you probably should think about in a bad way.
Yeah. I'm not going to go around eating them.
Yeah. Wait till I get up there. I'll show you the good ones.
Exactly. Next time you come. Well, it's been fun having you. We'll have to have you back. Next week, we on the New Bridge Radio Show, we are going to have our guest Gloria Rand joining us, and she is an amazing woman. She found 4 divinely inspired principles to let go of self-doubt. And she has an amazing story, and you won't want to miss that episode of the New Bridge Radio coming up next week. I hope you'll come along and join us on that show, and you can catch us on most podcast platforms later. And also, one other thing I need to mention is after our show, it is Todd Bates and Haunted Voices Radio coming up next on the New Bridge Radio Show. You won't want to miss that. And that's it for the New Bridge Radio Show for this week. Thank you all for coming and joining us on this episode of the New Bridge Radio. Have a great week.